In a quiet graveyard, a man in a blue suit kneels before a gravestone. His name is Maxwell Carter, a millionaire who once had everything except peace. He thought his ex-wife, Emily, had left him forever. But one silent afternoon, his world shattered when he found two little girls crying at her grave. When he softly asked, "Who are you?" the older one whispered, "She was our mommy." And in that moment, Maxwell's heart stopped, because those little girls had his eyes. From that day on, his empire of glass and gold began to change. This is a story of heartbreak, redemption, and the power of love that heals even the coldest heart. Stay till the end, because what happens next will touch your soul and teach a lesson needs to hear. Maxwell Carter sat alone in his 28th floor office, a kingdom built of glass and steel. The sunlight poured through the wide windows, bathing the polished desk, the gold clock, and the perfect order of his world in warm light. Yet inside, his heart felt colder than the marble floors beneath his shoes. He adjusted the cuff of his blue suit, sharp, tailored, perfect. The same color Emily used to say brought warmth to his eyes. But today, even that shade couldn't melt the frost within him. Outside, the city buzzed. Cars rushed below like rivers of light, but Maxwell didn't hear them. His thoughts drifted somewhere else, to the voice he hadn't heard in 6 long years. Emily. He could still remember her laughter echoing in the hallways of his old home, soft and musical. It used to make even the coldest mornings feel alive, but that sound was gone now, replaced by silence that had grown too familiar. People in his company called him the Ice Millionaire. He smiled rarely, laughed never, and worked until his assistant had to remind him to breathe. Success had made him rich, but love had made him human once, and losing it had turned him to stone. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers tracing the edge of an old photo frame turned face down on his desk. The picture inside, Emily in a white sundress laughing under a maple tree, had been hidden for years. Yet he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. 6 years since she left without a word, no fight, no note, just silence. He had told himself he didn't care, that he was better off without her, that emotions were distractions. But no matter how many buildings bore his name, he couldn't fill that quiet space she'd left behind. He stared at his reflection in the window, the perfect millionaire everyone admired. But behind the polished image was a man still haunted by, what if? What if he had listened more? What if he had loved harder? What if he hadn't let his pride build walls between them? He sighed, loosening his tie. Something about today felt wrong, like the air carried an unspoken message. His chest tightened with a weight he couldn't explain. For years he'd been too busy running from his memories, but that morning they came rushing back, stronger than ever. He remembered Emily's soft voice whispering, "Promise me, if you ever wear that sky-blue suit, you'll think of me." He'd laughed back then, brushing it off. But now, as he looked at the sleeve she once touched, his throat burned. Why did it suddenly feel like she was near? He turned toward the window again. The city lights shimmered, but his eyes blurred. He didn't understand the ache inside him. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was something heavier, like a warning. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. He ignored it at first. Another meeting, another deal. But then the second buzz came. This time from his personal line, the one nobody called anymore. He hesitated, staring at the name flashing across the screen. His pulse slowed. It was a name he hadn't seen in years. "Hello," he answered quietly, his voice rough. There was a long pause. Then a soft, trembling voice whispered, "Mr. Carter, I'm calling about Emily." The pen fell from his hand. The world around him seemed to blur and fade, leaving only that name echoing in his head. "Emily." The voice continued, "I'm sorry to tell you this, sir, but she's gone." Maxwell froze. Gone? No, it couldn't be. The air vanished from the room as the words crashed against his chest like thunder. He leaned forward, gripping the desk as his breath hitched. Gone. His Emily, the only woman he'd ever truly loved. He felt something deep within him shatter, quietly but completely. The clock ticked softly. The world outside kept moving, but inside that office, time stood still. A single tear escaped down his cheek, a tear no one had seen in years. He whispered her name once more, his voice breaking apart like glass. "Emily." And somewhere, in the echo of that name, began a story he never expected. One that would change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and family. But fate wasn't done with Maxwell Carter yet. That phone call wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because soon, at a quiet graveyard on the edge of town, he would meet two little girls whose tears would uncover the truth he'd been blind to for years. The soft ring of the intercom shattered the heavy silence inside Maxwell's office. He pressed the button absent-mindedly, not realizing that this simple act was about to change his life forever. "Sir," came his assistant's voice, trembling slightly. "There's something you should know." Maxwell didn't look up. "Not now, Evelyn. Tell them I'll call back." But the assistant didn't stop. Her tone cracked, and the words that followed would burn themselves into his soul forever. "Sir, Emily Carter passed away last week." The sound of her name sliced through him like glass. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd misheard. His grip loosened, and the papers in his hand fluttered to the floor. Silent messengers of a truth too cruel to accept. He stood frozen, his mind struggling to connect two impossible ideas: Emily and death. His heart pounded painfully in his chest. His voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. "What did you say?" Evelyn's voice trembled again. "I'm so sorry, sir. I thought you'd want to know." He didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, at the fallen pages, unable to move. The world around him faded. The ticking clock, the hum of the city below, even the air seemed to disappear. After what felt like forever, he walked slowly to his office door and said in a low, steady tone, "Cancel everything today. No calls, no meetings." "Yes, sir," Evelyn whispered. He locked the door behind her, the click echoing through the stillness. The mask he'd worn for years, the calm, powerful millionaire, began to crumble. He turned to the corner of his desk where a photo frame lay face down. He picked it up, hands trembling. Emily's smile stared back at him, bright, soft, full of life. The sunlight had caught in her hair that day, and she'd teased him for not smiling enough. He remembered her laughter, the way she'd cup his face and say, "Maxwell, you may own the world, but you still don't know how to live in it." His throat closed. His chest ached like a wound reopening. "Emily," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me you were hurting?" He walked toward the window, his reflection faint in the glass. His eyes, once cold and unreadable, now glistened with tears that burned their way down. For years he had pretended not to care, buried himself in work, told himself love was weakness. But now, with those few words, everything came crashing down. He remembered their last night together, the argument, the slammed door, the silence that never ended. He had waited for her to return. She never did. He used to imagine she was happy somewhere, far from his cold world. But now he realized she had been gone, truly gone, and he'd never said sorry. He sank to the floor, pressing the photo to his chest. "I should have found you. I should have tried harder." The walls around him blurred through the sting of his tears. No deal, no amount of money, no company could ever bring her back. He had everything. Yet in this moment he was the poorest man alive. The sun outside had dimmed, shadows creeping through the glass walls, as if the city itself mourned with him. Time passed, but Maxwell didn't move. His breathing was shallow, his eyes red. He whispered again, softer this time, "Emily, I wasn't ready to lose you." Hours later, when the office was empty and the world had gone quiet, he stood, straightened his tie, and looked at himself in the glass. Behind the blue suit and the cold eyes stood a man cracked open by regret. He turned the picture frame in his hands once more and noticed something he had never seen before, a faint handwriting on the back. Her voice seemed to whisper through it. "Don't forget the place where we met, Max. Promise me if one day I'm gone, You'll come see me there." He traced the words with trembling fingers. That place. The old graveyard where they'd first confessed their love under a maple tree. His heart pounded with a strange pull, a quiet voice urging him to go. Something deep inside told him this wasn't just about saying goodbye. There was something waiting for him there, something Emily hadn't told him. He slipped the photo into his coat pocket, straightened his blue suit, and whispered one final time, "Wait for me, Emily, I'm coming." Then, with heavy steps, he walked out of the office, unaware that his next breath of grief would lead him to two little girls crying beside her grave, and a truth that would change everything. At the quiet edge of the city, where wildflowers grew between forgotten graves, Maxwell's footsteps would stop before two small figures in red shirts and blue jeans. He'd gone there to mourn his ex-wife, but what he would find waiting for him there would shake the very foundation of his heart. The sky above was soft and golden as Maxwell's car rolled to a slow stop beside the quiet graveyard. The world outside seemed to fade into stillness. No voices, no city noise, only the whisper of the wind moving through the oak trees that lined the worn iron gates. He sat there for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, unable to move. His heart felt heavier than the silence around him. This was the place Emily had asked him to visit one day, but he'd never imagined it would be under these circumstances. Finally, he opened the door, the sound of gravel crunching beneath his shoes echoing through the emptiness. He held a small bouquet of white lilies, Emily's favorite. He remembered how she used to tuck one behind her ear when they'd walk by the lake. Each step toward her grave felt like walking through memories. The air smelled of earth and wildflowers. The wind carried faint whispers, voices of souls long gone, but one whisper, one memory, drowned out the rest. "If something ever happens to me, promise you'll bring white lilies. I'll be waiting." Maxwell's throat tightened. His pace slowed as he passed rows of weathered stones, his polished shoes brushing against fallen leaves. Every heartbeat echoed louder, every breath came shorter. Then he saw it. A simple gray stone, newly carved with her name etched deep into it. Emily Carter. She loved deeply even when unreturned. His vision blurred. The lilies trembled in his hand. He knelt, one knee touching the cool earth, his lips parting but no words escaping. He could only stare at the name, her name, and the cruel line beneath it. But then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. A soft sob. Maxwell turned his head slightly. Just a few feet away, two small figures knelt in the grass, one with golden curls and a red shirt, the other clutching a worn teddy bear so tightly it looked like her only source of comfort. The older one, maybe 6, had tears glistening on her cheeks as she brushed dirt from the grave. The younger one, barely 5, whispered softly, "Mommy, please wake up. Please." Maxwell froze. His heart jumped painfully in his chest. His hand loosened, and one lily fell to the ground. He stood still, afraid to breathe. Who were these little girls crying at Emily's grave? He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Sweetheart, are you two okay?" The younger one looked up first. Her eyes were round, shimmering hazel. Eyes so familiar it sent a chill through his spine. She sniffled. She was our mommy. The older girl wiped her sister's tears and looked at Maxwell with a mix of fear and sadness. "Mommy said an angel in a blue suit used to love her. Are you that angel?" Maxwell's lips parted, but his words died in his throat. His world seemed to tilt. An angel in a blue suit. That was what Emily used to call him. Every time he wore this exact suit, she'd smile and say, "You look like my angel." He knelt down slowly, his heart hammering so loudly he thought they could hear it. "What's your name?" "I'm Juliet," said the older girl, her chin trembling but brave. "And this is my sister, Catalina." Juliet and Catalina. The names sounded like they had been taken straight from Emily's dreams. He looked at their faces closely now, the delicate features, the soft blonde curls, the tiny freckles near the nose. A lump rose in his throat. Their faces, they looked so much like Emily. "Do you have someone looking after you?" he asked gently. Juliet shook her head, whispering, "Mommy said she was sick, but she never told us who to call. We come here every day after school because we don't want her to be alone." Maxwell felt the air leave his lungs. He didn't move, afraid the slightest sound would break the fragile stillness between them. He whispered almost to himself, "Emily, what did you do?" Juliet tilted her head. "You knew, Mommy?" Maxwell's hands trembled as he brushed a tear from Catalina's cheek. "Yes," he said softly, voice breaking. "I knew her better than anyone." Catalina hugged her teddy bear tighter. "Mommy said she loved an angel in a blue suit, but he went away. She said maybe one day he'll find us." The words hit him like lightning. "He'll find us." He stared at the little girls, his vision swimming. His body shook as realization clawed its way into his heart. The age, the eyes, the words, it couldn't be coincidence. No, it was something far deeper, something he was almost too afraid to believe. He looked back at Emily's grave, his lips trembling. "You kept them from me," he whispered. "Why?" Juliet frowned softly. "Mommy said she didn't want to make the angel sad." Maxwell's heart shattered. His chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. His entire life, all the years of cold success and loneliness, suddenly felt meaningless compared to the two small faces staring up at him. He reached out, brushing their hair gently, tears now falling freely down his face. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. "Not ever again." The girls didn't understand the full meaning of his words, but they felt the warmth in his voice. Catalina leaned against him, small and trusting, and Juliet followed, placing her hand in his. Maxwell looked up at the sky, his tears glistening in the sunlight. For the first time in years, his heart wasn't empty. It was breaking, but breaking open. He stood there between the past and the future, between the woman he'd lost and the children he never knew he had. And in that quiet graveyard, he realized that life had just given him one last chance to love again. But as Maxwell held their tiny hands, one haunting question burned in his mind. Why did Emily hide them from him? The answer would come soon, in the form of a hidden letter, a truth written in her own hand, a truth that would both destroy and save him. Maxwell's breath caught in his throat. The world around him seemed to fade, the trees, the wind, even the sound of his own heartbeat, until all that existed were those two trembling voices. He stood there, frozen in disbelief, his hand still gripping the bouquet of white lilies. The petals quivered as though echoing the storm rising inside his chest. He took a hesitant step closer, lowering his voice so he wouldn't frighten them. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" The younger girl, Catalina, looked up with tear-streaked cheeks, her lips trembling as she tried to form words. She clutched the worn teddy bear tighter against her chest as if it could protect her from a world too big, too cruel. "She was our mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible, fragile like glass. Maxwell felt his chest tighten painfully. The way she said mommy, so full of love yet so full of loss, tore through him like a blade. He could barely breathe. The older girl, Juliet, shifted slightly, wrapping her arm around her little sister protectively. Her blue eyes, though wet with tears, held a maturity far beyond her years, the kind born only from heartbreak. She took a deep breath, looked straight at Maxwell, and said something that would stop his world cold. "Mommy said an angel in a blue suit used to love her." His hands began to tremble. Juliet tilted her head, her voice trembling but curious. "Do you know him?" The lilies fell from Maxwell's grasp, landing silently beside Emily's grave. His knees nearly gave out. He could feel the blood drain from his face as those words sank deep into his soul. An angel in a blue suit. The exact words Emily used to whisper every morning before he left for work. He could almost see her now, smiling softly as she fixed his tie, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek, whispering, "My angel in a blue suit." Don't forget to smile today. He had laughed back then, brushing her off with a playful grin. But now those words came back to him like a haunting melody from a life he'd destroyed. His eyes welled up. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. Your mommy said that? Juliet nodded slowly. She told us stories about him, said he was strong and kind and that she loved him very much. But she also said... Her voice faltered. She looked down. Maxwell crouched to her level, his heart racing. What did she say, sweetheart? Juliet's eyes filled with tears again. She said her angel had to go away because he didn't know something very important. Catalina tugged on her sister's sleeve. She said maybe one day he'll come back when the sky feels heavy. Maxwell felt his entire body shake. The sky-blue suit he wore suddenly felt like both a curse and a memory, a living ghost wrapped around him. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Do you know who that angel was? He asked softly, though he already knew the answer. Juliet tilted her head, studying his face. You look like him, she said innocently. Mommy said he had sad eyes, just like yours. That was it. The moment his heart broke completely. He turned his face slightly away, covering his mouth with his hand as a tear escaped, one he didn't have the strength to hide. He wanted to hold them, to tell them everything. But how could he, when even he didn't understand how he'd become this stranger to his own children? Because now, staring into those little faces, Emily's eyes, Emily's curls, Emily's softness, he knew the truth that terrified him most. These weren't just any children visiting their mother's grave. They were his. But why hadn't she told him? Why had Emily carried this secret alone all those years? Juliet took a small step closer, holding Catalina's hand tightly. Mister, did you love our mommy? The question hit him harder than any blow could. His lips parted, but his voice failed. 1,000 memories flashed before him. Laughter in the kitchen, whispered promises under the stars, tears that had gone unanswered. I did, he said finally, his voice trembling. More than anything. Juliet's lips quivered. Then why didn't you come back for her? His heart felt like it had stopped. The innocence in her tone tore through him more than any accusation could. He knelt down fully now, tears freely falling. Because... He paused, his voice shattering. Because I didn't know she still needed me. The girls didn't move, didn't speak. They just looked at him with wide, trusting eyes that made him feel both forgiven and destroyed all at once. A moment passed, and Catalina took a small step forward, holding out her teddy bear. Mommy said if we ever find the angel, we should give him this, so he doesn't feel lonely anymore. Maxwell took the old teddy bear in shaking hands. It was small, faded, but smelled faintly of lavender, Emily's scent. He pressed it against his chest, closing his eyes. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you, sweetheart. As he looked back at Emily's grave, his heart screamed with all the words he never said, all the time he'd lost, all the love he had thrown away. He realized then that this wasn't just a meeting. It was fate, a second chance written in pain and innocence. He looked at the girls again, wiping their tears gently with trembling hands. Would you like to come with me for a while? I think your mommy would want that. Juliet looked at her sister, then nodded slowly. If mommy sent you, we trust you. Maxwell smiled faintly through his tears, the first true smile he'd given in years. He didn't know it yet, but taking their tiny hands would change his life forever. The empire he'd built would never compare to what he was about to discover. The warmth of family he never knew existed. Maxwell's breath caught in his throat. The world around him blurred. The gray stones, the whispering wind, even the sound of birds faded into silence. All he could see were those two small faces looking up at him, filled with innocence, pain, and something that pierced straight into his soul. Familiarity. He slowly sank to his knees beside them. His fingers trembled as he brushed away the white lilies he had dropped without realizing. The petals fluttered across the dirt like fallen memories. Girls? His voice cracked, softer than he intended, almost breaking. What? What did your mommy tell you about that man in the blue suit? Juliet, the older one, lifted her head. Her eyes met a hazel just like his when it met his for the first time. Mommy said he made mistakes, but he had a kind heart. Mistakes. The word cut through him like glass. He remembered every fight, every night he'd stayed late at the office instead of coming home. He remembered Emily's tears, her silence, her final goodbye that came without explanation. Catalina sniffled and wiped her little nose with her sleeve. She said, "We got his eyes." His heart stopped. No air, no thought, just truth. Maxwell stared at them. Those tiny faces, the soft curls of golden hair, the same dimple that appeared when they tried to smile through tears. He could see Emily in their lips, their expressions. But the rest was him. A shaking hand rose to cover his mouth. He blinked, but the tears came faster than he could stop them. His throat tightened as reality slammed into him. 6 years of emptiness, 6 years of silence, 6 years he could have been a father, all stolen in the shadow of pride and pain. He whispered, his voice almost gone. She never told me." Juliet tilted her head, confused. "Did you know our mommy?" He nodded slowly, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, sweetheart. I knew her. She was everything." Catalina, still clutching her teddy bear, scooted closer. "She said our daddy was brave, but she said he was sad too. Mommy prayed for him every night." Maxwell broke. He pressed his palms against his eyes, his whole body trembling. Emily had never stopped caring. Even after leaving him, she had prayed for him, protected him with her love from afar, while he had cursed the silence between them. He looked up at the two girls, their eyes wide, innocent, waiting. His voice quivered, full of both awe and pain. "Juliet, Catalina." He said their names slowly, reverently. "Do you know who I am?" They both shook their heads gently. Maxwell took a deep, shaking breath. The truth felt like a storm breaking loose inside him. "I think," he whispered, his heart pounding in his chest, "I might be your daddy." The girls blinked in confusion. Then Catalina whispered softly, You mean the angel Mommy talked about?" His lips trembled as he nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, I think I'm him." Juliet's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't only sad. "Mommy said one day he'd come back to find us." Maxwell's vision blurred. He reached out, his hands shaking as he gently pulled both girls into his arms. They didn't resist. They just clung to him, small hands clutching his suit, warm faces pressed to his chest. For the first time in 6 years, Maxwell's heart felt alive. The silence that had haunted him shattered in the sound of their tiny sobs. He could smell their hair, faint vanilla, just like Emily's. He could feel their warmth, their heartbeat, the fragile proof of what love had left behind. He whispered into their hair, his tears falling freely. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have been there. I should have been with her. With you." The girls didn't say anything. They just held him tighter, like they had been waiting for this moment all their lives. And in that graveyard, surrounded by silence and sorrow, Maxwell Carter, the cold, powerful millionaire, fell to his knees, not as a man of wealth, but as a man who had just found his soul. He pressed his forehead to Emily's grave and whispered, "You gave me a piece of you even after you were gone. I promise, Emily, I'll never fail them." The wind brushed gently through the trees, as if she had heard him. As he lifted his head, Juliet tugged his sleeve. "Are we going home now? Daddy?" Maxwell froze, the word daddy echoing in his chest like a heartbeat. He nodded slowly, a faint smile trembling on his lips. "Yes, Princess, home." But deep inside, one question haunted him. Why didn't Emily tell him? What truth had she hidden before she died? He didn't know it yet, but that answer would change everything. Maxwell's chest tightened, as those small words hung in the air like a fragile thread. Mommy said our daddy was far away. He couldn't breathe. Every memory, every cold conversation, every slammed door between him and Emily came rushing back like a storm he could no longer outrun. The empire he built, the millions he earned, none of it meant anything now. The only thing that mattered stood right in front of him, two innocent souls with eyes that mirrored his own. He looked at them, really looked, and realized what he had missed. 6 years ago, when Emily left, she wasn't just walking away from a man. She was walking away to protect something, or someone. She had been carrying his children, and he had been too blind, too proud, to see the truth hiding behind her trembling smile. Maxwell pressed a trembling hand against his chest. "She never told me," he whispered, almost to himself. His voice broke. "She never told me you were mine." Juliet tilted her head slightly, her soft blonde curls falling across her face. "Are you mad at Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and shaking. The question hit him harder than any business failure ever could. Mad? How could he ever be mad at the woman who had carried his heart and given him 2 more? He blinked hard, trying to stop the flood of emotion, but it was no use. He knelt down again so he could see them eye to eye. "No, sweetheart," he said gently, his voice breaking between words. "I'm not mad, I'm just sorry. Sorry for not being there. Sorry for not knowing. Sorry for everything." Catalina, clutching her teddy bear tightly, took a tiny step closer. "Mommy said everyone makes mistakes," she murmured. "But good people fix them." Her words struck deep. He could almost hear Emily's voice echoing through that sentence. The same softness, the same grace. Even in her absence, she was still teaching him how to love. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but his eyes burned again. "She always believed in forgiveness," he whispered, his voice trembling, "even when I didn't deserve it." Juliet's small hand reached for his. "It's okay, Daddy," she said, the word sounding new, innocent, but powerful. "Mommy said angels come back when it's time." That one word, Daddy, broke him completely. He had spent years living like a ghost, chasing success to fill the silence she left behind. But now that one word gave his life meaning again, he wanted to hold on to it forever. Maxwell wrapped both girls in his arms, holding them so tight they could feel his heartbeat pounding beneath his sky-blue suit. "I'm here now," he whispered into their hair, "and I'm not going anywhere. Ever." He felt their small arms circle around his neck. They didn't ask for toys or money or fancy things. All they wanted was what he had never learned to give before: love. As he held them, guilt and love fought inside him like 2 raging storms. He remembered Emily's face the last time he saw her, tired, pale, holding back tears as she said, "You don't need me anymore, Maxwell. Maybe one day you'll understand." Now he understood. She wasn't leaving to hurt him. She was leaving to save their daughters from the emptiness that had swallowed him whole. His throat tightened. He looked up toward the gray sky, whispering, "Emily, you were right. I was too lost to see what mattered, but I see it now. I see them." Juliet lifted her head from his shoulder. "Daddy, can we come home with you?" she asked softly. He smiled through his tears, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You already are home," he whispered. "Right here." He pressed a hand to his heart. "Always." The wind moved gently across the graveyard, brushing against the lilies. He swore he could almost feel her presence, as if Emily herself was standing nearby, smiling through the quiet breeze. He rose slowly, holding Juliet's and Catalina's hands. Their fingers were small, warm, trembling, trusting. For the first time in years, Maxwell Carter didn't feel like a lonely man standing on top of the world. He felt like a father, a man finally learning what love truly meant. As they began walking toward his car, Catalina tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, Mommy said she left something for us. She told me to never lose my teddy bear." Maxwell's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the worn bear she was clutching tightly, the one Emily must have given her before she passed. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Catalina smiled a little. "There's a secret inside him. Mommy said Daddy would find it one day." Maxwell froze, staring at the teddy bear as if it suddenly carried the weight of the universe. What could Emily have left behind? A message? A truth she couldn't tell him in life? He didn't know, but he was about to find out. The sun was beginning to sink behind the tall glass buildings when Maxwell opened the car door for the girls. His hands still trembled. Everything felt unreal. The way they looked at him, the way they trusted him, the way fate had tied their lives together again when he least expected it. "Would you like to come with me?" he asked gently, trying to sound calm even though his voice shook. "Just for a while?" Juliet looked at Catalina, her little brow furrowing. "Mommy said, never talk to strangers." Maxwell's heart twisted. He nodded slowly, his eyes soft. "She was right, sweetheart. But I think your mommy knew me. She'd want you to be safe." Catalina studied his face for a moment, the kind blue eyes, the same ones she saw in her own reflection, and then she reached out her tiny hand. "Okay," she whispered. When her fingers touched his, something inside him shattered and healed at the same time. He helped them into his car, fastening their seatbelts carefully like he'd done it 1,000 times in a dream. The drive to his mansion was silent except for the sound of the road and the girls' quiet curiosity. They looked out the window with wide eyes as the city lights shimmered like stars. Maxwell couldn't stop glancing at them in the rearview mirror, the way they whispered to each other, the way Catalina clutched her teddy bear close, the way Juliet stared at him like she was trying to solve a mystery. When they arrived, the mansion loomed like a palace, tall, silent, and cold. For years it had felt empty, echoing with nothing but footsteps and regrets. But tonight, as two little girls stepped inside, something changed. The air felt lighter, warmer, alive. The marble floors reflected their small sneakers, their giggles bouncing off the high ceilings. The maids froze, shocked. They had never seen children inside this house. Maxwell smiled faintly and waved them off. "They're with me," he said softly. Catalina ran ahead, her laughter ringing through the hall. "It's so big," she gasped. "You live here all alone?" He nodded quietly. "I did," he whispered, "but maybe not anymore." Juliet wandered into the grand living room, her eyes landing on a black piano sitting by the window. The same piano Emily had loved to play when she was still his wife. Dust glimmered on its surface like faint starlight. Catalina climbed onto the piano bench, her small legs swinging. She pressed a single key, and the sound echoed through the mansion. Gentle, haunting, familiar. "Mommy said you used to play this," she said softly, her voice trembling with memory. Maxwell froze. He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching something sacred. "She told you that?" Catalina nodded, smiling faintly. "She said you played for her when she was sad?" His throat tightened. He sat beside her, his sky-blue suit brushing against her tiny shoulder. His fingers hesitated over the keys. The last time he'd touched this piano, Emily had been sitting right here, smiling through tears as he played the song she loved most, "The Light Between Us." He pressed one key, then another, and soon the melody filled the silence, low, deep, full of sorrow and longing. The notes trembled with years of unspoken words. Juliet stood quietly, holding on to the edge of the piano, her eyes glistening. "That's Mommy's song," she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak. His vision blurred as he played, every note carving his heart open. When the final key echoed through the air, silence fell, but this time it was gentle, peaceful. Catalina looked up at him. Mommy said music makes people feel what words can't say. Maxwell smiled faintly, wiping his tears. She was right, sweetheart. She always was. The girls explored the house after that, running up the grand staircase, giggling in hallways that had only known silence. Maxwell followed slowly, his eyes soft, his heart heavy yet full. Every laugh they shared filled a room that had been dark for years. When bedtime came, he tucked them into the guest room, though it already looked too small for the love that now filled it. Juliet looked up sleepily. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He froze. That word again, fragile, beautiful, life-changing. "Yes, princess. Can you stay until we sleep?" He smiled softly and nodded, sitting at the edge of the bed. "I'll stay as long as you want." Catalina snuggled into her blanket, still clutching her teddy bear. "Mommy said you'd come back when it was time," she murmured, drifting into dreams. Maxwell brushed their hair gently, watching their faces as they fell asleep. His heart swelled, guilt and love swirling together like two rivers meeting for the first time. He leaned back, whispering into the dimly lit room. "Emily, I found them, and I swear, I'll make everything right." As he turned to leave, something small caught his eye, a torn patch on Catalina's teddy bear. Inside it, something glimmered faintly. His heart skipped a beat. Was this the secret Emily left behind? He reached for it with trembling hands. The house was quiet again that night, but not the kind of silence that hurt. It was a softer quiet now, filled with the distant sound of small breaths and gentle dreams coming from the room upstairs. Maxwell stood in the hallway, staring up at the flicker of warm light spilling from under the door where Juliet and Catalina slept. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. But as he walked through the mansion, the walls began whispering memories. Every room had a story, one that began with laughter and ended in heartbreak. He could almost hear Emily's voice again, soft and teasing. "Maxwell, you work too much. Someday money won't keep you warm." He smiled faintly, tracing his fingers along the polished wood of the banister. "You were right, Emily," he thought. "You always were." In the grand living room, the scent of her perfume still lingered faintly in the air, lavender and something sweet. He closed his eyes, breathing it in, letting it take him back to the nights when she danced barefoot on this floor while he played the piano. The sound of her laughter had once echoed like music in these empty halls. Now that laughter had returned. Not from Emily, but through the tiny voices of Juliet and Catalina. Their giggles had filled the mansion earlier that day, turning lifeless corridors into something warm and bright. He could almost feel Emily's presence smiling through them, as if her spirit lived on in every sound they made. Maxwell walked into his office, the place where he had once buried himself in work to forget everything that hurt. The city lights glowed through the glass walls, reflecting against the dark mahogany desk where his empire had been built, and where his heart had quietly broken. He sat down, resting his hands on the old leather chair, and noticed a faint mark on the edge of his desk. A small scratch, shaped like a heart. Emily had carved it years ago while laughing, saying, "If I leave a mark, maybe you'll remember me when I'm gone." He had laughed then, but now that mark felt like a wound. As he reached for the drawer to grab a pen, his hand froze. Something was tucked deep inside, an old box, dusty but carefully sealed. The handwriting on the lid made his breath hitch. Emily. His fingers trembled as he lifted it out and set it on the desk. It was small, wrapped with a faded ribbon, the kind she used to tie around her letters. He opened it slowly, afraid of what he might find. Inside were two small hospital bracelets, each with a name, Juliet Carter. Catalina Carter. His heart stopped. Underneath them was a folded piece of paper. He opened it with shaking hands. The familiar loops of her handwriting made his vision blur even before he read the first line. "If something happens to me, tell Maxwell. He deserves to know they're his." The words hit like thunder. His chest tightened, breath sharp and uneven. His tears fell onto the page, smudging her ink. He could almost hear her voice reading it to him, gentle and broken at once. He pressed the paper to his heart, his voice shaking. "Emily, why didn't you tell me sooner?" He stood there for a long moment, staring at her words, his tears falling silently. She had kept his daughters a secret, not to hurt him, but to protect them. From his anger, from his pride, from the man he used to be. Now, holding that letter, he understood. She had never stopped loving him. She had simply chosen love in silence, the kind that sacrifices everything. Maxwell leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. "You carried this alone," he whispered, "and I was too blind to see it." He wanted to be angry, but he couldn't. All he felt was love, fierce, endless, overwhelming love, for the woman who had believed in him even when he didn't deserve it, and for the 2 little hearts she left behind to remind him that love never truly dies. He placed the letter back inside the box and held it close. "I found them, Emily," he said softly, his voice trembling, "and I'll give them the life you wanted for them, full of warmth, laughter, and music. I promise you." As he wiped his tears, something else caught his eye. Another small piece of paper tucked behind the ribbon. It looked like the corner of a photograph. He pulled it out carefully. It was a picture of Emily holding 2 newborn babies, smiling softly, exhausted but radiant. On the back, she had written, "Our forever began twice." Maxwell pressed the photo to his lips, his tears soaking the edges. "Our forever never ended, Emily," he whispered. "It just changed." The night outside grew darker, but inside the mansion, light still glowed, from 2 small night lamps in the girls' room upstairs. The future he thought he'd lost was sleeping under his roof, waiting to begin again. He turned off the office light and looked one last time at the letter, whispering, "Thank you for loving me even when I didn't deserve it." Then, quietly, he walked upstairs, toward the room that now held the pieces of his heart. As he opened the door, Juliet stirred in her sleep. "Daddy?" she murmured softly. "I'm here," he whispered. "Always." He stood by their bedside, watching them breathe, knowing Emily was watching too. Somewhere beyond, proud and at peace. But deep inside, one question still lingered in the shadows of his heart. What really happened to Emily? Because something about her death didn't feel right. The next morning arrived with sunlight spilling softly over the city skyline. Maxwell Carter, the man who once ruled every boardroom with iron calm, stood before his mirror. But the reflection staring back at him wasn't the same man anymore. The usual coldness in his eyes had been replaced by something warm, alive, something new. Downstairs, laughter echoed, the laughter of 2 little girls who'd changed everything in less than 24 hours. Juliet was trying to tie her shoes while Catalina was busy feeding crumbs to the mansion's old cat, who'd followed them since last night. Maxwell watched from the doorway, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, that house felt like a home again. He drove them to his office himself, something his driver couldn't believe. His staff stared as the black car rolled to a stop outside Carter Enterprises. And the powerful CEO stepped out, not alone, but holding 2 tiny hands. Gasps rippled through the lobby. No one dared to ask who they were. But everyone whispered, "He's smiling." Juliet looked up at the glass building with wide eyes. "Daddy, is this where you make all the big papers?" she asked, pointing at the tall windows. He chuckled softly, the sound strange even to him. "Something like that, sweetheart." Inside his office, Juliet's eyes went straight to the big leather chair behind his desk. She climbed up and spun around, laughing. "Daddy's office is huge! It's like a castle!" Catalina clapped and ran to the window, pressing her small hand against the glass. "The people down there look so tiny," she said in awe. Maxwell watched them, his throat tightening. Every corner that once echoed with the sound of meetings, deals, and deadlines was now filled with innocent giggles. His heart, long buried under success and silence, began to beat with something real. He walked over to his desk, picked up the phone, and said quietly, "Cancel all my meetings today." His assistant froze. "Sir, you never cancel meetings." Maxwell looked at her with a soft smile. "I've got more important work today." "May I ask what that is, sir?" she said hesitantly. He looked over at his daughters. Catalina humming softly at the window, Juliet still spinning in the chair. His voice trembled. "Learning to be a father." There was silence in the room, a silence filled with awe, not confusion. His employees had seen him angry, powerful, even ruthless, but never like this, never human. The day passed differently. Instead of numbers, Maxwell learned stories. The girls told him about their favorite songs, their mommy's bedtime tales, the little things they'd wished for. He listened, truly listened, the way Emily always begged him to when she was alive. At lunch, Juliet spilled juice on his suit and everyone held their breath, but he just laughed. "It's only a suit," he said. "I have 1,000, but I only have one of you." Catalina smiled shyly and whispered, "Mommy said you were an angel in a blue suit." His heart twisted, but he smiled through the ache. Maybe that angel finally found his wings again. When they left his office that evening, the staff lined the hallway, watching silently as their boss, the untouchable Maxwell Carter, walked out hand in hand with two little girls who had somehow softened the steel around his heart. As the elevator doors closed, Juliet looked up and said, "Daddy, can we come again tomorrow?" He knelt beside her, brushing her hair gently behind her ear. "From now on, you can come wherever I go," he whispered. The elevator descended, carrying the man who once thought he had everything, but had only just discovered what truly mattered. And somewhere deep inside, a voice seemed to whisper, Emily's voice, soft and proud. "You're finally the man I always knew you could be." Days melted into weeks, and the once silent mansion began to breathe again. The ticking of clocks no longer sounded lonely. They beat in rhythm with laughter, with tiny footsteps running across marble floors that had only known the echo of emptiness before. For the first time in 6 years, Maxwell Carter's home wasn't just walls and windows, it was warmth, it was life. Every morning began with the giggles of Juliet and Catalina. The girls would race down the grand staircase, their blonde curls bouncing like sunlight. Maxwell, the same man who used to start his day with corporate calls and financial reports, now started it with sticky syrup fingers and laughter that could melt stone. He learned to make pancakes, not perfect but messy and sweet just the way they loved. He'd flip them too high, and Catalina would gasp every time, clapping when one landed safely on the pan. Juliet would grin and declare, "Daddy, that one looks like a heart," and he'd laugh, genuinely laugh, the sound echoing through the halls like music. In the afternoons, Maxwell found himself learning things he'd never imagined. How to braid little strands of hair with gentle fingers. How to tie tiny shoes without breaking his patience. How to kneel on the floor and listen, truly listen, to stories about imaginary friends and fairies hiding in the garden. His office papers began to gather dust. But he didn't care. The stock reports could wait. Bedtime stories could not. The world outside could spin on its own. His world now revolved around two little girls who had unknowingly repaired a heart shattered by regret. Every night he tucked them into bed. Catalina would always hold her teddy bear tight, whispering, "Mommy used to sing before sleep." Juliet would add softly, "But now you're here, Daddy. You can sing too." At first he couldn't. His voice cracked with emotion. But night after night he found the courage. His lullabies were quiet, filled with the ache of love and the peace of forgiveness. Sometimes tears fell mid-song, but the girls never noticed. They just smiled, drifting into dreams under his voice. When the house finally went silent, Maxwell often stood by their door, just watching. The way they breathed, the way they curled under the blankets, it was everything he never knew he needed. Then he'd step onto the balcony, looking up at the starlit sky. "Emily," he'd whisper, voice trembling in the cool night air. "I'll protect them. I'll make up for every year I missed. I promise you that." The wind seemed to move softly through the trees, almost like her answer, gentle, forgiving, proud. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, his heart didn't ache. It glowed. Weeks later, the mansion was no longer the home of a millionaire. It was the home of a father. The rooms once filled with silence now carried laughter, bedtime giggles, the scent of pancakes, and the sound of two tiny hearts that had unknowingly healed a broken man. In their smiles, Maxwell saw redemption. In their hugs, he found forgiveness. And in their love, he discovered that true wealth had nothing to do with money. It lived in the arms of family. That night, as the stars shimmered above, Maxwell whispered, "Thank you, Emily, for giving me back my heart." Months later, people began to notice the change. Maxwell Carter, the cold, unreachable millionaire, had become gentle, kind, and full of heart. He funded orphanages, supported single mothers, and told everyone, "Family is not about power. It's about love you almost lost." At Emily's grave, he stood with Juliet and Catalina holding their hands. He whispered, "Your mommy made me a better man." Catalina looked up. "We miss her." Maxwell smiled through tears. "I do too. But she left me the best gift of all. You two." The wind brushed gently through the flowers. 3 hearts stood together, had not broken anymore. And the world quietly learned, even the richest man can be poor, until he finds love again.